Sorry.
Board games, board games is what we're talking about. Board games and RPGs, I'm not gonna shout. Over there, if you look, you will see that there is a person whose name is Cat. Cat has done some things which might impress. Cat is the owner of Pelgrane Press. Cat has made several RPGs, brought them into reality. Board games and RPG publishing is what we're talking about. Board games and RPG publishing. I'm not gonna shout. Hey, good morning.
Hey.
And good morning to Xate. It is lovely to see you. I agree, you can be the most ex and hello. Um, yeah, that's possibly true. And hi, I guess this is Alan again with the weird username. But hello, lovely to see you. And I guess you're wandering around on your mobile today. I hope you're having a good day. And I am Bez. It is bedtime if you're living in New Zealand. And we are blethering about board games. Again, you know, it depends on what your bedtime is, because maybe for you, 11 p.m. is not your bedtime. And that's totally okay. You decide when your bedtime is. And if you're living in the UK and your bedtime is 10 a.m., maybe you're working night shift. I don't know. Maybe this is your bedtime. On you go. Enjoy your bedtime whenever it is. And so, coming up today, we are talking about RPG publishing. I realised that even though I had Lolvi on, I don't know if you're familiar with Lolvi, Cat. So Lolvi and I talked about safety mechanisms within LARP, and we had a great chat about that, which was really invigorating. And then a few weeks afterwards, we kind of talked about safety mechanisms in board games, which was more of a theoretical thing and how that could be applied. But we've never really talked about tabletop RPGs. And we've never really, I mean, this is the 187th episode, and all I've been chatting about is like board games and stuff. So it's exciting to have someone who actually, for several years now, has been bringing RPGs to life, like a surgeon with a knife or whatever. I don't know, the metaphor kind of breaks down. So, yeah, you know, I'm just having Cats on because they're an excellent person. And would you like to talk? How did you actually get into any of this, and why did you agree to come onto this show, Kat, to talk about this?
Yeah, so it's kind of a very long and involved story as to how I got into it all. The TLDR of it is I got into it in college, but I've been as it's kind of says in my bio, I've been basically volunteering and doing things in the RPG space since the late 90s. So I've been in and around, but a lot of the voluntary work that I've done has focused on event organizing, so on running conventions. And then in 2012, I helped to run Dragon Meet, which is an RPG convention in London. And there I met Simon Rogers, and he kind of saw what I had done with helping to organize that, and he must have been impressed somehow. So a couple of months later, he had a vacancy. My predecessor, Beth, left and moved into mainstream publishing. So he kind of remembered me, and he sent me through the job vacancy and said, you know, is this something you'd be interested in? And I was like, OMG, this is my dream job. So I'll kind of skip all of the preamble about like the big life questing and working in accounting and how deeply unsatisfying all of that was, and how everyone had been telling me for ages that I should do something in games. And I'm like, yeah, but there are no jobs in RPGs. Because I knew I wasn't a writer, I knew I wasn't an artist, I wasn't on the creative side, and there are no really kind of advertised jobs for the kind of work that I do in particular, which is more on the production kind of side of things. So yeah, that's kind of how I got. That's kind of how I started working professionally, I guess, in the industry, from being a very, very committed, very, very long term kind of volunteer. You know, like I said, I had run and founded conventions in Ireland, and also helped to run conventions in Edinburgh and in London by the time I got this job. So I was fairly established, I guess. And certainly it was something that I had kind of known from the first time I ever tried role playing. It was at my university's Freshers' Day, and basically I remember sitting at a table, and the GM wasn't great, and he had a table full of freshers, none of whom were particularly engaged, none of whom kind of really got it. And I just, and honestly, I was just sitting there and I was going, well, this guy isn't very good, and these people aren't very interested. But if he was telling a better story and these people actually wanted to play, this could be the greatest hobby in the world. And that was a long time ago now, and I've never lost that love and that enthusiasm. Like every time you sit down at a table to role play, it's you don't know where the story's going to go. You don't know what's going to happen. It's like a whole new adventure every time. It's I have never come across anything that's so simultaneously creative and empathetic and immersive and kind of intellectual, while also it's like both. It's like a combination of your heart and your head together. It's just, there is so much in this hobby, that after like more than 20 years, like I still feel like I haven't even scratched the surface of what it is and what it can be. So yeah, it's constantly evolving, and just, yeah, I love it.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. And a quick hello to Alex in chat, and hello to Jess, who says hello, Cat. And yeah, lots of love to Jess. I know that you're still grieving about your cat. Lots of love. Just to catch up to the story. Yeah. But yeah, it was a rescue cat, but let me ask, kind of, why did you agree to come on this show? I mean, we don't see each other that often, so someone in chat wants me to always say how I know people, and I can't remember how we met, but I think it was probably at a convention. Like, we've definitely shared space at Scottish conventions and Edinburgh and Dragon Meets, and we've been aside to each other, and I've seen you, and have we actually even played a game together ever?
Well, we played a game together. We played a LARP together we played that fantastic, I can't think of the name of it, but it was a kind of an AI experimental LARP at
oh yes, oh my gosh, January. That was amazing.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was such a good game. Oh my gosh. I feel like we met in Edinburgh at Compulsion, which is the RPG convention in Edinburgh, and I kind of thought
it has a few board games.
And board games. Yeah. You're right. It has a big board games bit as well. And I feel like we had met there, but the first time I remember properly speaking to you was at Playtest UK in London. So you were playtesting one of your games. I can't remember which one at the moment, but I recognized you from Edinburgh, and I playtested one of your games and gave you feedback and stuff. And that was the first time I remember speaking to you. So that would have been 2014 or 15.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we've kind of
that I was first getting into my game design journey.
Yeah,
and somehow
it was
we
very
became
early
friends.
on, I think. Yeah.
we definitely chatted, like, I think that might have been before Compulsion, because I came to Compulsion and then I saw you and I recognized you, and I was with oh shoot, I'm forgetting their name, leader of Cats, Roslyn. And then we just started talking about Ingress. Do you remember this? And then I joined
no, I
Ingress.
don't.
We were having that conversation about Ingress. Do you not remember?
My memory is so bad. My
You
memory is
talked
really, really
about how
shocking.
you played Ingress and you
I
had this
did.
time when you were kind of following someone like through doorways or something, like doing the portals or something.
Yeah.
And it felt like kind of lovely having that human connection through this mobile
Yeah.
game. And we were just chatting like at the role-playing convention, I think. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but why did you agree to come on this show was the only question.
Sorry, yeah, I know. This is my first coffee of the day, so I'm not going to be very lucid until like after I finish this. And as you can see, a big mug.
I'm enjoying the tangents. It is a blather.
So why did I agree to come on the show? Like, I'm not going to lie. Last night when I was sitting up until very, very late, waiting for results from elections that are currently as yet undecided. Yeah, I did kind of wonder why I had agreed to it. Certainly, the fact that it's in the morning is a big no-no. I'm just I am not good with mornings. I would not usually. I got up specially for this, basically, even though it's
I
10
really
o'clock
appreciate that
in Ireland at the moment. Yeah, so it's just because it's you, right? It's because it's you, and I know you, and I feel like we've kind of been through a lot together. So so yeah, if anyone else had asked, I would probably have said, can you do later on? And if not, or I might have maybe scheduled it for a convention or something when I would be already up. But yeah, I'm really interested in what you're kind of doing with design. And like I said, we first kind of, our first proper conversation that I remember was at Playtest UK. So we were both talking about the kind of the act of designing games, and kind of critically analyzing the act of playing games and how that game came out and how it was realized and how it played. And so I've always kind of thought of you as somebody who was quite knowledgeable about design, with regard to board games in particular. Yeah, but then, like I said, we had such a wonderful experience at that LARP. At I am just blanking at on the name of the convention, the LARP convention. It starts with S and it's a short word. It's like the shock or the storm or the I'm going to be killed for not remembering this. Oh, yeah. Okay. No, I'm blanking. Oh.
So the convention is called The Smoke. It's run by Mo Hallcar and Laura Wood and other people. And this one LARP was about AIs that are gaining sentience. And there was an actual sorts of quite a bit of gamification. I mean, normally with LARP, it's very low on rules and you can do literally anything you want. But there was this kind of point structure, almost like a board game, where as you went through, you would gain these points and then you would use these points to buy certain aspects. And you would go to the games master and say, okay, these are the attributes that I'm buying. And as time went on, you would be allowed to buy more self-awareness and the ability to start lying to the humans and the ability to maybe even, it was like you might even start an AI uprising against the humans. Or potentially you might just want to be really nice to the humans. Maybe the humans aren't the nice ones. Maybe the AIs are just being really nice. And then maybe the humans are out to kill the AI. It's like so horrible. And I think that's the majesty of RPGs and story games in general. Because I think Richard Garfield, it's really interesting talking about games having this notion of being an ortho game. And then, which is, okay, this game is all about demonstrating your success, how how good was your strategy? How good were the decisions that you made along the way? On the other hand, like some games we might just play for the experience and maybe that togetherness, and it gets into the whole why do we play? But RPGs, when you're playing this role, and we'll get into all of this, why do we play RPGs? But let's talk about and hello, Nicholas, it's lovely to see you. And yep, let's talk about brilliant things. Brilliant things. What's the little thing which is brilliant? I mean, we've talked about it so much, and you're the first person to talk about RPGs. So let's just say RPGs are a brilliant thing. And let's kind of give a shout out to RPGs. And so, yeah, RPGs, I'm going to say, are brilliant because they allow us to embody and try out things that we might not feel okay doing in real life, maybe because they allow us to experience the anger that we maybe don't want to have in real life, or the grief that we don't want to, or indeed other narratives, and they allow us a greater appreciation of humans and empathy in general. And so that is why I think RPGs are brilliant. Why do you think RPGs are brilliant, Kat?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said there. I mean, I kind of touched on this earlier when I was talking about what originally drew me to RPGs. But I've never, like, if you watch a film or TV, or even if you read a book, and I was a massive reader when I was younger. I still read a lot, obviously, but it's a very kind of a, excuse me, I guess it's a very passive experience. So you're sitting there and the media is static, right? So you can't interact with it, you can't change it. Maybe that will change with TV and film in the future. I guess people are looking at like interactive TV, but fundamentally the medium that you are consuming is static. The pages don't change, the TV show or the film doesn't change by you watching it. You are a passive consumer of something that somebody else has wholly created, and you can interpret it in different ways, right? I did critical analysis in college, so there are lots of different ways that you can interpret these media. You can have your own opinions on them, but fundamentally you can't change what is there. You can't change what exists. And role playing is like the complete opposite of that. In that the whole point, and I've kind of said this before, but like when we publish an RPG, what we're giving people is not, we're not giving people a finished, complete medium. What we're giving people is essentially a framework, right? A good RPG is a framework to create a particular type of story and to deliver a particular type of experience for the players. But it's an immersive experience, right? It's if you're watching a TV show or you're watching a film, it can stir big emotions in you. Certainly media have made me cry before. It can draw big emotions, but not in the same way. It can't engage you in the same way as role playing can, because role playing, you are literally, the whole concept is that you are putting yourself in the shoes of someone else. And maybe that someone else is an elf who's like hacking their way through a dungeon, or maybe in the case of the more kind of indie story games, or kind of more Nordic kind of games that I particularly enjoy, maybe that's a refugee who's coming to a country from another place. Maybe it's an artificial intelligence who's just becoming self-aware and asking themselves those big questions about what it means to be alive, what it means to be happy, what is meaning, how do they find meaning, how do they create meaning for themselves within their lives. And these are massive questions, and you don't get to engage with them. And as you touched on earlier, Bez, like the whole point of an RPG is that it's a safe space to explore these kind of, really big questions and really big aspects of our humanity, effectively. And there's no other medium that I've ever encountered that really affords us that kind of deep dive into into what it is like to be a person, you know,
Mm.
but in a very reflective way, you know, in a way that allows you a distance and allows you to be kind of self-aware. You know, like role playing is used in as a therapeutic tool quite often by psychologists. You know, it's that kind of, particularly as I understand it, in like couples counseling. You know, a big technique that people use there is to ask people to imagine themselves as the other person, right? They, you know, therapists will ask you to role play the other person effectively, and that's because it is such a powerful tool for empathizing with the viewpoint of another person, you know. And like I said, I haven't come across anything that even vaguely kind of engages your whole kind of, you know, like I said earlier, it engages your whole head because it's an intellectual, it's a kind of a thinking game or a thinking experience, but it's also very much a heart and soul experience, because it's almost impossible to play a character without having some of yourself come through in that character. And you know, different people can do that to different extents, but fundamentally, you know, you have to draw on your own, you know, your own emotions, your own experiences to to fully realize a character. So I think it can teach you a lot about who you are and where you're coming from and what your preferences are, as well as what other people are like. So yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack, and I guess, you know, you start talking about why is your primary passion brilliance, you're going to get, you know, a big meaty answer, which I do appreciate. Like comparing it to board games, which I'm going to do just to bring it back, if you don't mind me doing so, it feels like there's definitely more scope than even a board game, because like within a board game the rules are so constrained, whereas in an RPG within a LARP there is more scope to for self-expression and more nuance in that. Whereas let's say that in terms of like analog being high fidelity of expression, and you know, it feels like a board game might be more okay, here's a countable number of options which you can possibly do within this game states. It might be very large, but it's at least countable. Whereas within an RPG it might be literally uncountable, and you could do anything you want, which is so amazing. And then you've got all these allegories and building up that empathy and even more immersion than board games in some ways. And so as you take on this role, and what you said about your own self seeping through, it reminds me of the comic The Dark Tower, by I believe John Kovalic.
John Kovalic, yeah.
Kovalic, is that how you pronounce the name? I'm sorry, John, but I doubt that they're going to watch this. But so John Kovalic, where the entire point of the comedy is that even if they're playing these totally different characters, you know, the selfish person is still selfish. And talking about like the safe space for learning, I know that Nicolas, I don't know if it's Nicholas or Nicolas, let me know if I should pronounce the S or not, who says that you can talk about allegories, where an uprising of marginalized groups in science fiction have historically been used to talk about such uprisings and tensions in real life through a lens of otherness, though. And so kind of talking about those androids gaining sentience and starting to come up. And that's a really interesting point. And oh, Nicholas with the S, thank you for letting me know. And so yeah, it feels like and Raf Coster, obviously, like their entire thing is like games of any sort are a safe space for learning, whether that's sports or indeed TV game shows, although it's arguable whether those are a game because they do have so many real life consequences that if you are kind of gambling for a real life changing amounts of money, then maybe it ceases to truly become a game because there's too much impact from within the magic circle to outside of it, if you know what I mean. But setting aside all of that, let's just agree that RPGs are brilliant, and I will get into your question in the questionably quick questions. And safe-ish rather than safe, surely, says Alan. Yep, that's a fair point. It's a safe-ish environment for learning. There needs to be safety mechanisms for sure. And we've talked about that before. But let's go into the questionably quick questions. So this is where I'm putting you under a little bit of the spotlight. And I'm going to say, okay, Kat, what time did you wake up this morning?
20 to 10.
Okay, and what time do you normally wake up?
About 2 p.m. Yeah.
Do you live on a US time?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I've always been a night person. Like my whole life, I've always been a night person. And one of the best things for me about working in RPGs, this sounds terrible, but it's so true. Like I work remotely, so I'm in my house at the moment, and this is my office. This is where I work from. But yeah, it just I can set my own hours, right? I can work whenever I want to, and it allows me the flexibility to deal with my often very, very erratic sleep schedule. Yeah, like when we went into lockdown earlier on this year because of COVID-19, I actually moved from East Coast time, which is what I kind of say my sleep pattern. Like I'm basically living on East Coast time, East Coast US time, and I moved to Pacific time, which was 8 hours. 8 hours of difference from Irish time. That was slightly problematic. I was like, okay, this is maybe a bit too far. Like, when I'm up at the same time as people in Seattle, it's like, yeah, I should do something about this. But yeah, no, usually I'm kind of, I tend to be more awake on US time or on East Coast US time than on Irish time.
But, is it because you've got interaction with American people, or if you were actually in America, would you just end up waking up really late American time?
Yeah, I would. It's just that like I said, I'm just not a morning person. It's like I can kind of I can appreciate, why mornings might be good, but they're just not for me. They're just not for me. My brain doesn't work properly, and I'm grumpy, and yeah, I'm just not. I'm not a happy person in the mornings.
Well, I am incredibly appreciative. Thank you. I feel slightly odd, but like better make it a good show now.
I don't know if you can see my t-shirt. But...
It's too early. What's the small text? Can't quite see that.
The small text.
Small text?
There is, yeah. It says, "It's too early. Please stop talking."
Oh.
It's one of my favorite t-shirts. A friend bought it for me because, yeah, they know me. Is Alan on New Zealand time?
No, Alan's just being silly. Alan is in the UK. Xates, I know Xates is in Germany, and Nicholas, I don't know where everyone else. We've got someone from Thailand probably watching, which is Jess, who it's not quite bedtime for them, but it's definitely you would be up by now if you were in Thailand. I think it's 5 p.m.
Right, yeah.
And Xates agrees it is too early. So, yeah, so we've got quick questionable questions for me. From Irfi, why did you schedule this interview for this unearthly hour? Well, Irfi, this is my 187th show at 10 a.m. UK time. And the reason that I started doing these was because I felt slightly bad about kind of always getting up later and later. I personally like to see a good amount of the sun if I'm to have any chance of feeling okay at all. And so I've been doing this show at 10 a.m. UK time for the past, goodness knows, however many 187, past 188 days, I have always done some sorts of chats. It started off just me, and then I started reaching out to people who agreed to come on, and now it's more and more just chatting to other people. And Nicholas is from, and we've got Saisa, hello, who's a fan of coffee, and someone else is still in bed. So, back
Andrew
to the
has it right. Yeah, he knows the score. I wouldn't be in bed too, Andrew.
let me ask, what are a few of your other favorite things when you're not making RPGs or playing RPGs? What do you enjoy other than potatoes?
I am honestly though. I put it in my bio because like people laugh. I'm such a stereotype. I love potatoes. I really really do. Like I took a picture of my family at Christmas dinner a year or two ago, and we had 3 different types of potatoes, right, with our meal, with our Christmas dinner. And I was like, you know, the rumors are true, right?
Mash, roast,
Like,
fried? Or do
yeah,
you mean 3 different
yeah.
breeds of potatoes? Do you mean like
No,
purple?
like we had mashed, we had roast, and we had chips.
Okay, yeah.
Now, to be fair, the chips were mostly for the kids, but we could all have had some. Certainly, we all had at least mash and roast potatoes. So it's
Roast
otherwise
is where it's
not.
at. Roast.
Otherwise, it's not roast.
I
Is
mean,
where it's at.
what is your favorite type of potato? I mean, favorite. What's your favorite type of potato, as in breed of potato, if you have one?
Oh, I quite like. Is it King Edward's or is that a dog?
Yeah.
There's there's a breed of potatoes, which is called King something, and I think it might be King Edward's.
I think it
But
is.
they're really nice and kind of flowery and fluffy. They
Mm.
make really good baked potatoes, so I quite like them.
How do you feel about those like purple potatoes or sweet potatoes?
Oh, I am not. I do not hold with sweet potatoes. No, I
Oh.
don't. I'm afraid. I am. No, they're. It's kind of it's a bit like I guess cassava and banana. It's like, right, okay, they both have their place, right? But do not give me sweet potato chips, right? Do not do that to me because like it's not a potato. I mean, I know it's a potato, but it's not a proper potato. Don't hold with that. I haven't had any kind of the, I guess, heritage potatoes. Is that what you mean by like the purple potatoes? In the same way they have like purple carrots, which are supposed to be the true color of carrots.
I've
Or
had like these kinds of.
orange.
It's kind of like a sweet potato. They're quite thin like that, and
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, they taste very much like a sweet potato.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It sounds
I'm
like you're just not
not
down for this.
not a fan. Not a fan. The only time I'd accept them is in kind of autumnal roasts, right? So if you had like butternut squash and sweet potatoes and a lot of those kind of more autumnal vegetables and you roast them all, I can live with it in that very very limited scenario. But otherwise, no, just keep them away from me. Just give me a proper spud.
Xate says the purple potatoes aren't that sweet, really. They taste more like a potato. They're great for a roast. So maybe consider trying them. But I think that if you
Yeah.
really like the kind of basic earthy nature of the potato and you don't want anywhere near the sweet potato, then maybe stick to your white potato. But speaking of potatoes, before I know, because this is the question of big quick questions, what is your favorite way to have a potato cooked?
That is a really tough question. I'm gonna chew more of my protein bar and think about that.
Okay, while Kat is doing that, I'm going to say that my personal second favorite is the roast potato. I think that, a roast potato is pretty darn awesome. You know, boil it, make it, give it a wee bit of a shake, make it fluffy on the outside. That's the trick. And then get a good amount of oil over it and a little bit of seasoning before you put it in the oven. Roast potatoes are where it's at. But for me, the best way to cook a potato is tadik, which is an Iranian thing that you put underneath rice. So when you're cooking rice, you slice potatoes and then you put them on the bottom of the pan. This is like if you cook rice properly, like in a rice cooker, and then you never stir the rice or anything. You just kind of have the rice. What you've ought to wash the rice before, obviously, but rice, water, maybe a tiny bit of salt and saffron if you've got it, and then sliced potatoes with a little bit of oil smeared on the bottom. and then that fries and gets crispy on the bottom side, and on the top side it takes in the flavor of the rice.
I have not come across that, but I'll have to seek it out if I ever get to go to a restaurant again. I will have to have a look for that. That sounds interesting.
It is a delicacy.
Yeah, I think that my second favorite is probably, I really love the way Americans make hashed potatoes. So I think they like grate them up and then fry them. They're really good. Like, I'm a big fan of breakfast foods, and those to me are like breakfast potatoes. So those and like hash browns as well are kind of breakfast potatoes. Oh, excuse me. But definitely, I think roast potatoes for the win. Like, roast potatoes are always just, oh yeah, definitely agreeing with Alan there on the new potato salad. I really, really love. I make a very, very salty, very, very mayonnaisey potato salad, but it's like, oh, so good.
My mouth is watering.
But yeah, the roast potato, I think probably because we only ever had them on a Sunday when I was growing up, so they were always like a really big deal. You know, there's a whole kind of there's a specialness associated with roast potatoes that means it's a treat, right? If you're having roast potatoes, so yeah. So I think that kind of like food memory has kind of enhanced it's boosted roast potatoes' place in the potato ratings, I think, for me.
Hello, J Guards. It's lovely to have you join us. And Ichvi says, do you know Mike Keneally and Beer for Dolphin song Potato?
No, I do not.
So apparently there's a song about potatoes that you might want to look up after this. So we can make a wee notes of that. Yeah. And before we move on from the questionably quick questions, do you know any RPGs involving potatoes?
I do not, actually. There's I know quite a lot. My kind of friend and sometimes collaborator, Sharon Biswas, has done a lot of food related games. But I don't think he has one about potatoes. There's a gap in the market there, I think.
Yeah, you could be well placed to take advantage of this. I mean, I don't know whether it would involve like making potatoes. I mean, Graham,
Walmsley.
Thank you, who made the game about, and it's like you're a family and you're all making this food together. It was lovely, and maybe something like that for potatoes, where you're cooking the potatoes as part of the game, or maybe a game where, I don't know, you play the parts of a potato, and you're kind of subdividing yourself, and you're spawning new children. I don't know, and then you die, and then you've got all these potato offspring.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work particularly.
I have no idea either.
Yeah, although I have been just this year, because I've had like very little else to do. I haven't been traveling the way that I usually would be. When I've been peeling potatoes, I've been taking the peelings, right, and I've been like planting. Oh God, that's really bad. But yeah, I've been planting the skins of them effectively, and I've grown some little tiny potatoes, like they're teeny tiny, but I've grown potatoes out of it, which I'm quite excited about. I mean, mostly they've ended up being toys for my kittens rather than food for me. But look, it's fine. They're just a perfect size for like kitten paws to like bat around the place. So they love them.
So, oh, that's even worse. No. Sorry, it's just so bad. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's talk about what is a typical day in the life of Cat Tobin.
Ooh.
recently? Like, I
Recently,
know
yeah.
things have been
Yeah, exactly. So there's like the before times and the now times. So we'll go into the now times, I suppose. So like I said, I get up kind of somewhere between 12 and 4, which kind of averages out at 1 or 2. I try to get up earlier than 2 if I can, but I don't always make it. And particularly the last kind of 8 months or whatever, I've gotten the lack of an external impetus to get out of bed has made it harder to get out of bed. So I got up at like kind of 2 o'clock. I like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of breakfast, but I guess most people would probably call it brunch, or if they were being charitable, or lunch if they were not being charitable. But I have very strict rules about what is considered a breakfast food versus what is not. So there's some things that you can have for breakfast, and then there are some things that you can't. So I like to kind of spend a bit of time making a kind of a nice big breakfast that usually involves like fruit of some kind, and always involves like a vat of coffee. So I'll kind of faff around and cook breakfast, and feed the kittens and empty their litter, and I've started drinking water in the mornings, which is supposed to be quite good for you. So I'll like drink a glass of water while I'm kind of cooking things and doing all of that. And then I'll usually watch something on YouTube or whatever while I'm having my breakfast, and then I'll come into the office. Started bullet journaling just before we went into lockdown, so in like February this year, and I've been really enjoying that. That's been quite a. It's I've always really struggled to kind of keep a diary of any kind, but I found that the bullet journal is really it just works really well with my brain in that it's not too onerous. So I've started kind of planning out my weeks in that, and adding my to-do lists to that. So I'll kind of have a look at my to-do list, and then I'll invariably get distracted by like one of the team asking me something on Slack, or something on Twitter or something on Facebook. So I'll end up like kind of doing that kind of invisible work of keeping everything together for a while. But then I like to kind of try and get a good solid chunk of time, like because my job is so it's so varied, and there are a lot of tasks that take a couple of minutes. But then there are some things that just need literally blocks of hours. So if I have gotten up early enough, that kind of 3 to 6 or 3 to 7 block. Oh, sorry. I like to kind of try and reserve for a particular project. So like if I'm looking at a game text, for example, or if I'm doing a big chunk of layout, or if I'm doing some art direction, I like to kind of block out that time to just really kind of focus on that one task. And then I spend a long time cooking dinner, because I like to kind of cook things from scratch. So I'm not a very good cook, but I've gotten a lot better over the last
I mean,
couple of
it's
years.
admirable just doing that effort.
Yeah, the thing is, I find it, this is something that I realized recently, like I was not doing enough stuff offline. So a lot of my, like I work kind of online. Like I said, this is my office, this is my office chair, but this is also where I was doing a lot of my socializing, because a lot of my friends live, all over the world. So there wasn't a kind of a strong enough delineation between me when I was at work and me when I was not at work, because I was just on my computer the whole time. And I think that that's, an issue a lot of us have these days, because it is, the computer is so kind of all encompassing, and we use it for so many different things that it's hard to get away from it. So I've really found cooking is a good, like cooking things from scratch. So like chopping up all the vegetables and like, assembling a meal from scratch, is both kind of relaxing, but it's also a very different form of activity from being on the computer. And I'll usually have some TV on in the background, like, so I'll be kind of watching something while I'm cooking or whatever. Yeah, so then that'll usually take up 2 or 3 hours, depending on how much prep I've done previously, or how much I'm not. And then I'll go back to work. after that for another couple of hours. And then kind of 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock-ish in the morning, I'll usually, and I think people know this, like anyone who's interacted with Pelgrane, as a kind of a customer in the past, has gotten emails from me very late at night and been like, what on earth? And I'm like, yeah, sorry, it's just, that's when I work.
Yeah, I mean, people have different working days, and you shouldn't feel embarrassed by that.
Exactly, and I don't anymore. Like I said, I just kind of, I'm just like, look, this is how it works for me. So, so then kind of 1 o'clock, I kind of try and start to wind down from work and stuff. So again, I kind of go into the sitting room, and I got 2 rescue kittens. Well, they're not really rescue kittens; they're more like feral kittens. When did I get them? In June. No, in May, at the end of May. So I've had them for nearly 6 months now. They were born at the end of May. Maybe I got them in June or something. So let's call it 5 months. So that's kind of really changed how my day goes, because now they like to interact with me now. They didn't at the start, but now they do. So I'll usually go in and I'll kind of lie down on the sofa with like a blanket over me, and they'll both kind of snuggle into me, and we'll watch some TV, and I'll drink some like peppermint tea and kind of, have a kind of a decompression time, and a lot of kind of kitten scruffling.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. It's like, it's super, super low key, and also you may have noticed there was no leaving the house in there. But that's been kind of how it's been since lockdown. Like previously, like my typical day, I was spending 2 or 3 weekends out of every 4 traveling. So I was just constantly kind of on the road, and I was really set up to travel. Like you could say to me, hey, Cat, let's go to America for like 2 weeks. And I'd be like, cool, give me 10 minutes to pack and I will be ready to go. Because I just had it down. Like I was so used to it. Whereas now I can't even get a bus to Cork, which is like 60 miles away.
Yes.
I tried the last 3 times I've tried to get a bus, since lockdown, I've missed it each time. So I'm like, man, I used to like go to Australia. Now I can't even get a bus to Cork.
Definitely, lack of conventions has changed lots of things. And I just want to acknowledge the craziness. I don't know if you are seeing the chats at all, Cat, but there is a ridiculous amount of potato chat. We have started something terrible.
That is not something terrible.
I'm just going to say the one good pun is, hey, that's my chip. This is the one that's an actual pun. Hey, that's my chip. Okay, like, yeah, I can, okay. But everything else, no, you're just adding potatoes. Maya says, tiny potatoes are the best for the oven and are yummy. My mum is the queen of tiny potatoes. Everything from her garden is potatoes. And then we just descend into madness. Roll for the potato. 5 potatoes. El potato. And I love potatoes. Patchwork potato. The potato project. And potato length, also known as potato match. Rising potato. And Maya likes adding the E, apparently. Whereas the rise of potato is the expansion to Scythe. Lords of Potato Deep. And I can't change routes. It's already potato themed. You peeps are too much. You people are too much.
Yeah. No, totally not. Everything is better with potatoes.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Okay. Yep. Okay, so this whole So and there is actually a board game, I should say, a board game that involves potato warfare. I don't know if you know about this.
Did you say that involves potato warfare?
Yes. So you kind of, it's, like Mr. Potato, where you stick things into the potatoes, you do have to literally mutilate your potatoes. So if you are against your potatoes getting ruined, you might not want to play this game. Just a warning. But
Okay.
I can't remember. I'm struggling to remember the name of this game. Someone remind me in chats if you know what I'm talking about. But you actually stick. It's basically a miniatures warfare game, but you stick bits into your potatoes to turn them into little miniatures. That's basically the unique selling point. Yeah.
But like that sounds like a way of destroying both potatoes and a miniatures war game.
Yeah. It's like, anyway, let's not oh my gosh, this has been a ridiculous introduction to the show. It's gone completely off the rails, but let's talk very briefly for like 2 minutes. Recent highlights, games we've been playing. I played this game quite a few times last night. I'm enjoying the solitaire game just because every single sheet, so there's 48 sheets, and every single sheet, all the buildings are different. So it's kind of like Dominion, but even more variants. So you got all these new buildings, and it's like, okay, how am I going to work it out? Let me actually show you very quickly if I can. This is what a typical sheet might look like, and then you're thinking, okay, how am I going? This sheet changes. Conversely, this sheet is always the same. Let me make myself a little bit bigger. Sorry. So you're gathering resources here, you're spending resources here to get victory points, but then instead of spending resources there, you might spend them here to make these buildings. And these buildings are like kind of a bit of engine building. And so it allows you to do more things as the game goes on, but every single game, you get totally unique buildings, which is really cool. So it's like 48 sheets of paper, and every sheet of paper, unlike most roll and writes games, is completely different, which I really enjoyed. I've also opened up Empires of the North. It's one of the best punch boards. I will talk about that probably this weekend. But like, I mean, I'm really digging. Look, it kind of tells you what each bit is. So if you weren't sure, this is the scoreboard that used to be here. Like, just in case it's not completely obvious to you, these are the gold tokens. And this is what these things are. I mean, is that not really good for accessibility and just letting you get into the game? That's like such a lovely thing. And then in the bit where you pack everything away, it's got like a little icon for where everything should go. It's one of the best things. And also last night we played some games, and that was lovely with everyone that came, Runa and Xate and Tom Cauldron and everyone. It was good times. And so that was some of my recent highlights. Oh, and also I had a walk whilst talking. That's my exercise that I'm doing recently. I'm kind of going for walks around this field, which normally, because it's London, it does have like maybe 10 people in this field, but it's a big field, so I kind of stay away from people. It's all good. And I talk on phone. That's my exercise. And so that's my recent highlights. What have been your recent highlights? And in chat, feel free to let us know, but we are going to get on topic after this. We're going to try and speed up. So, Kat, what are your recent highlights?
So I recently played a game of the Yellow King RPG with Robin Laws, who was the writer and designer of it. And we played it as a kind of a Halloween one-shot. And the Yellow King has 4 different settings. And I had only played the Paris setting, which is kind of Belle Epoque Paris, 1895, which is kind of obviously the setting for Robert Chambers' original King in Yellow stories. So I'd only ever played that setting, but in this one-shot game, we played the setting called This Is Normal Now, which is like a modern day, setting where, you know, everything is fine and your lives are perfectly normal, except that they're not really. So it's all about kind of the reality horror and about, you know, the world of Carcosa kind of bleeding into ours, and the kind of strange vestiges of King in Yellow and his servitors and daughters kind of corrupting the modern world with their weird Carcosan influence. So I played a game of that recently, and that was really, really fun. That was a really, really fun game. I enjoyed that a lot. I got to play a flapper, so that was fun. Yeah, and I'm also playing a lot of board games online. So I'm not much of a video gamer. So my Steam account is almost all board games, basically. So myself and Gareth Ryder Hanrahan, who's one of our writers, and another friend of ours, Peter, have been playing a lot of Lords of Waterdeep on Steam. And we're actually talking about potato forming Mars. We've actually all just downloaded Terraforming Mars, so we're going to start playing that. But it's like, I had a look at it and I played a couple of test games, and I haven't played it in person, so I think it's going to take me a while to kind of get the hang of that. So I want to play through some test games before we start on that. And before that, we were playing Ticket to Ride. I love Ticket to Ride. Even, you know, independent of the infamous UK board that I have still big objections to. But yeah, so I've been playing a lot of Ticket to Ride always. I've also been playing a lot of Mysterium. I really, really like Mysterium. I haven't got to play it in person anywhere near often enough. So I've been playing a lot of Mysterium on Steam.
So does it work online, like with other folk? Does it feel good?
Yeah, well, I think I've been playing it with an AI, basically. And yeah, it definitely does. It's kind of trickier because the AI, I guess, doesn't always think like a person. But yeah, no, I've been really enjoying it. I found it a really good substitute for playing Mysterium, you know, in person or whatever. Lords of Waterdeep, again, I haven't played that in person. But I really, really enjoyed that. Actually, I like that an awful lot. So I used to have an app or a little mobile game version of Dominion, actually, seeing as you mentioned Dominion earlier. And it got discontinued for some reason. I don't know if there was copyright issues with it or something, but I really miss it because I love Dominion and I never get to play it. So yeah, so looking for a kind of and I have not yet. I bought Among Us recently, and I really, really want to play it because everyone is talking about it. But yeah,
I
but
want
I haven't.
To play it.
Yeah, so I haven't.
Like we should play it sometime. Like
do,
not
definitely.
In the morning, but
not
I mean,
in the morning. Never in the morning. Let's never do
like
anything
maybe
in the morning again.
I don't know. Like maybe 7 p.m. ish. That kind of time.
That is much more my time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm doing a lot of like all of my gaming. You know, a lot of my gaming was online as it was, but now it's really all online. Yeah, I'm also playing in oh, what were you going to say?
This one just cracks me up. It's like the potato insanity just keeps coming. It's what are you doing? I'm just going to
very
stop
proud
reading out the chat.
that my legacy for your channel will be
between two potatoes of Mad King Spudvig. That is pretty good.
That's impressive.
I'm not going to show all of them, but by the way, Nicholas has found the potatoes mini game. It is Kartoffelkrieg on Board Game Geek, which is potato war in German.
Yeah, in German.
So yeah, mountains of potatoes, and yeah, I'm just not going to you keep on going, but I'm going to just not acknowledge any more of this. Otherwise, we're not going to talk about RPGs at all. And I did actually have Cat not just to talk about potatoes, which we could talk about on Friday, like on one of the Friendly Friday forums.
Friday. Get it? Friday.
Oh, man! No, you're underside.
I know, I've corrupted everything, Bez. Your channel will never be about anything other than potatoes again.
Oh my God.
No. I also wanted to talk to you about going vaguely back to the topic.
Yes.
I've been playing a Swedish RPG as well on Roll20 called Lex Oculum. And that I'm really, really liking. Do you know Steve Bassett from Edinburgh?
I might do.
Yeah.
I can't remember them.
He's a good friend of mine from Edinburgh, and he's running it on. He's running Lex Oculum. He backed. I think it was a Kickstarter, So he backed that Kickstarter, and he's been running it on Roll20 for me and some other Edinburgh people. And yeah, and that's really, really interesting. It's kind of, I don't know if there's a word for that time period, but it's kind of like highwayman, kind of 1700s-y. Like, it's not yet kind of Georgian. It's kind of, I want to say Jacobean, but I could be wrong about that. So it's that kind of, but it's that kind of like later, kind of very much later fantasy, kind of historical, but it's got a heavy kind of an occult into it. And the way we're playing it, because the group that I'm playing with, I've played quite a few RPGs with them now, and we all have a very similar kind of, we enjoy a similar style of gaming. So like Steve's game is there are kind of mysteries to be solved, which is a big thing for me. I love my mysteries, but it's also quite philosophical. So a lot of the games that I really enjoy are kind of tackle these big philosophical issues. So with this one, it's about the kind of philosophical issues are around humanity, and the supernatural, and what it means to be human. Again, like, this is a big kind of recurring thing, I guess, in the RPGs that I've been talking about. But yeah, that's been really good. I really enjoyed that, and that's kind of an ongoing campaign that we're playing. We haven't got to the end yet.
So I am guessing that your life is full of the joy of these RPGs, like the joy of pondering the nature of yourself, the nature of the world around you, and learning more about it through the medium of story games. If you don't mind me banding, I want to almost lump role-playing games and even a thing like Rory's Story Dice. I mean, I guess they are incredibly different, but they're all kind of under the umbrella of story games. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. Do you know what I mean?
No, I know. Yeah. Well, it's kind of, they're all like a big thing that I kind of keep coming back to. I've done a lot of thinking about like what Pelgrane Press does, like what our kind of brand is, what the kind of games, because we publish such a wide variety of games. So, from a kind of a marketing perspective, that always say, oh, what's your USP as a company? What's your brand, kind of thing. And I've thought a lot about that, because a lot of our games are so different. You've got like the whole range from your kind of very standard D20 fantasy game, 13th Age, to like our kind of really, really quirky kind of like things like the #feminism anthology, like the Seven Wonders anthology, and now Honey and Hot Wax, which is our erotic art game anthology. There's a really, really big disparity between all the different kinds of games that we publish, but a big focus, which is coming back to your question, I am getting to it, is that they're all narrative focused, right? They're all really, they all kind of spotlight players. They're all about giving the players agency within the game. So like our core kind of gumshoe system is very player focused, right? It allows players to decide if something, like if a role is particularly important to them, it allows them to succeed at that role by spending points, So it's very player focused. But they're all very narrative focused, right? They're all about story. And that to me is one of the things that is the most important to me, I think, in an RPG, is the story, right? It's not just a matter, and I think that's why I often personally find kind of things like dungeon crawls quite unappealing, because to me there's no story there, right? It's just, you're just kind of going from room to room, killing monsters or whatever. So I love games that have a story. Right? I love games where you can basically write up what happened at the end and have like a really good novel, right? I love to have a nice kind of a story arc with, like peaks and troughs, and what Robin would call kind of the story beats. Kind of hitting the emotional highs and the emotional lows, and having like, cliffhangers and kind of resolution, and really nice evolutionary arcs of a story kind of within the game. And that's the one thing that's constant, I think, through all of the games that we've published, through all of our RPGs, is that we, we're just really focused on the narrative. We're really focused on the story. It's all about telling an interesting story. And yeah, and I think that that's kind of true of all of the games that I enjoy, is that they are more focused on the story.
And when we get, let's come up with a basic definition, because it's not role potato games. It's role-playing games. That's from Nicholas in chat. I'm just going to acknowledge that final one, and then please stop. Let's get into RPGs. But yeah, so Alan earlier on asked, is a board game with enough theme and immersion, does it turn it into a role-playing game? And I think Alan might be thinking of something like Holding On, The Trouble Life of Billy Kerr. I don't know if you know Michael Fox.
I do. Yeah. Oh, that is so good. I wanted to play that for ages and ages because, I heard a lot about it, and I was really interested because I really like board games as well, but I like them in a very different way to RPGs, and that really seemed like a kind of that really seemed like more of a crossover between board games and RPGs than I'd ever heard. So I got to play it actually at a virtual convention. I think it was a games day that was held at the game store in Manchester that I'm blanking through. No, what's the name of the game store in Manchester? There's a big...
Fanboy 3.
Fanboy 3. Yes, I knew there was a 3 in it somewhere. Fanboy 3. They did a kind of a games day very early into lockdown, and Michael Fox and Rory O'Connor were doing demos of some of their. Oh, and I'm blanking on the name of their company now. What's the name of the company that publishes it? Sorry?
Hub Games?
Hub Games, yes. So they were doing demos of Hub Games, and one of those demos was Holding On, Trouble Life of Billy Kerr. And I felt really bad because I was like, I feel like this is probably for, the public or whatever, but I was like, if there's space in this game, I really want to play it. And they were like, sure, jump in, loads of space. So I got to demo that, and that is such a, it's really, really interesting.
I mean, what distinguishes something like that from an RPG? Is it the measure of success? Is it the state of win or lose that turns it from an RPG into a board game? Is it that in an RPG, I mean, obviously with something like Dungeons and Dragons, it's a little bit closer to a skirmish game, you could say, because that's part role-playing, part kind of warfare, and there's a bit of tactics and strategy depending on how much you get into the battle. But yeah, how would you define what we're talking about?
So again, I come back to the story again. For me, it's an interesting question. Holding On is certainly the closest I have ever seen, like I said, to a kind of a crossover or a merging of the two. And I don't think it's the winning or losing. I don't think it's the kind of having a win condition. I don't think that's what distinguishes a board game from an RPG. It is in a kind of a weird nebulous space between the two. But I think fundamentally with an RPG, it's, even though you will often have an overarching plot that, you'll be playing a particular adventure, and the GM, if you're playing a GM's game, will have an idea of how the game is supposed to turn out. Whereas, and I think you touched on this earlier about with the finite versus, or the countable versus uncountable number of ways it can go, right? And it is very much I would put kind of Holding On in a similar box to say something like Once Upon a Time, which is like the storytelling card game. So they are both like you could very easily make them RPGs, but neither of them, I would say, are RPGs. And I think that's because a key element of RPGs is the kind of like I kind of feel like an RPG foregrounds narrative, and the mechanics are in a good RPG are only there to support the narrative and to structure the narrative. Whereas I think the opposite is true for a board game, in that the mechanics are the game. So
Mm.
even if the game has a story, the story is kind of bolted onto the mechanics. Whereas in an RPG, I feel like it should be the opposite, where I feel like the mechanics
Yeah.
on um, to the story kind of thing, or the mechanics should support the story. But it's a good question. There's a lot of kind of it's a
And
spectrum.
even like the mutability of the rules, because within the RPG, even if you're playing it as a group, normally there will be a little bit fudging. I think we could probably have, it's making me realize that we could have an entire 2-hour discussion about what is an RPG. Let's
Absolutely,
kind
yeah.
of sidestep it. I know, Alan, that I don't believe there's any Pelgrane Press games that include miniatures.
No, there aren't. None of them have minis, and none of them have like hex maps or anything like that. So yeah, they're. I think that most RPGs would be minis free. Would be my take on it.
Okay, so let's get into kind of a bit. I wanted to ask you a few questions, and I kind of put this in the banner of YouTube, so you probably should answer the question. So, firstly, how do you take pitches? Yeah, how do you take pitches? How do people send you an idea? If I had an idea for an RPG game, how developed does it need to be? How would I get in contact with you? Let's pretend that we don't know each other.
Mm-hmm. So we like being from an expectation management perspective, we very, very, very rarely take pitches for RPGs from people that we haven't already worked with. So generally speaking, so the way to do it, first of all, to answer your question, is that you would get in touch with me directly using the contact details on our website, or you would get in touch with our support email. And again, it's just support@pelgranepress.com. From the perspective of length and development, at that point, like if you send us a full game, I'm sorry, I am not going to read it. So the shorter it can be, the more likely it is that we'll at least kind of read it. And I know that sounds really harsh, but it's just, unfortunately, we are a very, very tiny company with very, very limited bandwidth. And much and all as I would love to read everything that we get, it's just not feasible. So in terms of a pitch, sending through actually what you're kind of scrolling through, I don't know if that's visible to your viewers at the moment, but just
I mean,
kind
it
of
should
a
be, yes.
paragraph or two about the kind of high concept. So like I said, we're not likely to publish something, to publish a standalone game from someone that we haven't worked with before. So the way that we'll usually tend to do it, if people approach us, we recommend that in the first instance, they look at our existing range of games, and they consider, if somebody pitches us something for one of our existing game lines, so like for Ashen Stars, for Cthulhu Confidential, or Gumshoe 1-to-1, we're a lot more likely, that's a lot more likely to be published than somebody's own homebrew game. But we will, we are very happy to kind of look at pitches and look at submissions. But again, just a paragraph or two with a high concept is more than enough. All of our Gumshoe games have kind of what we call like scenario structures baked into them. So they each have an outline. So like, for example, for Trail of Cthulhu, the outline is the kind of the hook which is like what grabs you into the adventure. And then there's the spine, which is kind of the outline of the structure of the adventure. And then there's the horrible truth, which is what's actually really going on within the adventure. So we would always recommend that people send us their pitches in that format, in the appropriate format for the game that they're submitting for. And that's it, or kind of, if people are at conventions, we always welcome people to come up and chat to us about it at conventions as well. Like I said, back in the before times, I used to travel a lot to conventions, so I was always kind of out and about the place. But we're always very interested in working with particularly people from underrepresented groups and working with newer writers. But we will very rarely, we just don't really have the capacity within our current publishing, our current production schedule to work on somebody's original material with them. So we'll kind of usually try people out on our existing systems first. With a kind of a smaller writing assignment. So that's kind of how, literally it is just a matter of like bugging ideas at us until we come to one that works for the writer and for us, kind of thing.
Is there anything that you're particularly would turn you off working with someone? You said that you like to work with people you've already worked with and someone who's willing to make a scenario for one of your existing things. But is there anything specific to RPGs that you would say, we wouldn't want to work with that person, or they don't like having changes made to their game, and that's presumably there's lots of editing and development that goes into it.
There is, yeah. And again, I think that's why we're more willing to work with people on our existing properties, because when people have their own RPG, they're very precious about it, and it can be very difficult, particularly for newer writers, to get feedback on that. And generally speaking, if people are at the point where they are pitching their games, they feel it's finished, right? It's at a particular level of completion. So if you then come to them and say, well, actually, this, we don't think that this would work for all of these reasons, it can be difficult for people to hear that. But in terms of things that would put us off working with somebody, it's like there is a kind of a professionalism in people's approach that holds true for whatever your job is, whatever your work is. And I'm sure it's the same in board games. It's like, if somebody is uncommunicative, if they're late with things, if they like miss deadlines and there's no communication about it, that would put us, that's one of the biggest kind of red flags to us in terms of working with someone. And we'd also like, it unfortunately doesn't necessarily go without saying these days, but we won't work with people who, we have a very strong ethical core, I would say, as a company, and we won't work with people who, like, we would not publish a pro-Nazi game if it was the best game in the world. It's just not something we would ever do. So there's a thematic aspect to it as well, in that we're very, we are interested in publishing kind of edgier things, but only from a very particular perspective. And we won't kind of,
when you get the designs, I realize that I didn't quite finish asking about this. So you get maybe a paragraph, and then how do you decide, okay, yes, this is good enough? In board games, it's like, okay, we like this, we've played it, okay, we're going to offer you a contract and we'll pay you a set royalty, and we're going to make a bunch of changes and publish it within 2 years or whatever. How does it work with RPGs? How many times would you have to play it? How would you come to those decisions? Can you walk me through it?
Yeah, sure. So it's quite different, actually. I think with certainly our process as a company is very, very different to what you just explained for the board game side of things. So an ideal kind of start to end process for us would be, like I said, somebody would approach us with an idea for one of our existing properties. We would kind of say, okay, we like that idea. You sent us through the paragraph or kind of to, your elevator pitch exactly, or essentially for what you want to write for that game. So what we look for is that you understand the tone of the game, that you understand the themes of the game, and that your idea reads like a kind of a fulfilling and interesting adaptation or exploration of that game, of that RPG and its themes. So if that's the case, we'll then ask people to do more of an outline. So we'll ask them to kind of outline it. Our Gumshoe games in particular, they're scene-based. So you kind of move from scene to scene, and then you gather clues effectively, because they're mystery solving games. So you gather clues through a series of scenes. So we'll maybe ask people to kind of sketch out what we call a scene flow diagram, or kind of how you move through the adventure, and what the kind of the key pieces of information that the players are collecting in that adventure. And then once we feel like we have that structure, like that kind of skeleton structure down, and that's very much an iterative process. It's kind of back and forth with the writer. Again, depending on how familiar they are with our properties. Once we feel like we have that down, then we'll say, right, okay, this is kind of set now, and now you can kind of take it away and basically write it up, right? So put the meat on that kind of skeleton. And then once they've written it up, say kind of as an adventure, we expect all of our writers to do playtesting. So we expect them to playtest it themselves, just to make sure that they're like, playtesting is so important. I mean, I know it's important in board games, but it's equally important in role-playing games. And you can tell if an RPG has not been playtested. So we will always ask our writers to playtest their games themselves. So we expect our writers to be GMs. We expect them to be running RPGs all the time, to have that GM level understanding of what needs to go in an adventure, and what information the GM needs to run that adventure properly. So we expect them to playtest it. Then they will send us through a kind of what we call a playtest ready draft, and we'll then put that out for public playtesting. So there's two different types of playtesting in RPGs. There is what I would call kind of internal playtesting, which is where the writer will playtest it with their own RPG group. So they're at the table with the game, seeing how players are responding to it. But a really vital part of the process for RPGs is external playtesting, which is where we hand that manuscript, we hand that text to someone who has never met that writer, right? To someone who has never played with that writer, who is completely separate to that writer. And we see how well they can recreate the experience that writer was aiming for at their own table. And that's a really key thing for us, because I don't know if it's true for board games so much, but in RPGs, there can be massive variances in what I call play culture, right? So, if you have a group of people who have been playing D&D together for like 30 years, they are going to approach an RPG in potentially a very, very different way to, a group of teenagers who are starting to game in college with kind of more with games that they've downloaded from itch.io. Those will have very different, what I call play cultures. And so they will approach the same text with different expectations. And there's actually, you do a massive amount of work in your head, like with your, like the play culture that you come from brings a lot of expectations to an RPG. So with the same written down text, two groups can play that game completely differently, depending on what their play experience has been. So anyway, TLDR, that's why external playtesting is so important, because it means that that game is not just going to people who, to people who have played within that play culture. and you are getting it out to people who are coming from a very different kind of perspective to you, and that determines whether or not the text includes everything that it needs to like I said, you're kind of trying to recreate, like I said, what the original writer was aiming for with that adventure.
And I feel the same as Maya, that because there is so much interpretation of the rules,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, the rules are a bit more loose in RPGs, whereas in a board game that's primarily being played to strategically work out what you can do, I'm thinking something like, sorry, looking to the right of my corridor, Battle Sheep, something like that, rather than a party game where it's more about the social dynamic. In a strategic game, at least, it's that place culture is going to be a lot more similar. And whereas for something where there's a judging system, that's going to be a bit different. But at what point? So you talked about the outline, then writing it up, having the internal, then the external, and at what point do you say, okay, yes, we're definitely publishing it, here's the contracts, and how does the contracts work, can you say?
Yeah,
Is it based on
so
royalties?
no, it's not. So we would never get to that point without already having a contract in place. We would generally, if we like a pitch and we can see, if it's a brand new writer, if it's somebody that we haven't worked with before, we'll ask for writing samples, and we'll do things like look at their social media and look at if they have a website. We'll look at their writing effectively so that we can get a sense of how well they'll be able to execute that idea. So we will, at that point, we will start talking about contracts and pay rates and that kind of thing. So we actually pay by the word at the moment for RPGs, and I don't like that, and I want to move away from it because it encourages waffle, right? It just encourages, why say in 5 words what you can say and get paid for in 50. So I really want to move away from that model. But we used to pay royalties a long time ago, but the issue is that that starts off being fine when a game is new, but like over the lifetime of a game, which for some of our games can be like 20 years. We started off in 2000. There's a long tail of diminishing returns. So you get to a point where you're paying out like $1 or $2 in royalties on some much, much older, much, much smaller books. And the time and the effort that it takes to calculate royalties on that just isn't worth it's more costly to calculate the royalties than it is to kind of I guess it's too much of an overhead from a kind of a time perspective, in terms of like working out how much to pay people.
I mean, Alan earlier asked if the size of the market, to which I wasn't going to bring it up. I just said it's a fair bit smaller than board games. I don't know if you would agree. And maybe that's part of the reason that you don't pay royalties, because whereas with a board game, sure, more than actually selling out of 5,000 copies is a really nice success if it's like published by you. But if it's like someone who's been doing it a while, you'd expect them to print at least 20,000 copies, if they're actually, and having a game that got 100,000 copies sold, it feels like, okay, in board games, especially in family-friendly games, that feels fairly reasonable. But in RPGs, I don't know if you're willing to share numbers of what would be a reasonable thing, or if that's too much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a thing that I will say first of all, just for a bit of context, is that in 2019, I've actually got a little chart up here because I thought this was really interesting. In 2019, the North American hobby game sales, so hobby board games, were $365 million. in 2019. So this for all of 2019 in kind of hobby board games, whereas role-playing games were 80 million, right? So just from a pure kind of industry scale perspective, that's the volume we're talking about, 365 million versus 80. And of that 80, I mean, I don't have any sense of how much of that 80 million was D&D, but it has to be at least half, if not more, right? So like D&D is such, there is nothing, I think, really in the board game space that comes close to being as disproportionately massive as D&D is to the RPG space. You know, so in the RPG space, you have D&D, you have Pathfinder, you've got maybe Star Wars from Fantasy Flight as was, and then there's just a massive, Shadowrun as well, maybe, and then there's a massive gap, and I mean a massive gap between those 3 or 4 games and those 3 or 4 companies and the rest of the market, right? And it's an incalculable gap, really. It's really, really massive. So that 80 million pie is largely divided between 3 different companies with a tiny slice left for everyone else. So we would expect to sell 3,000 copies of a game. Like if we sold 3,000 copies of a game over the first 3 years, like we would consider that doing pretty well. So yeah, maybe over the first 2 years, let's say, that would be, you know, that would be quite a successful game for us. So those are the kind of the numbers that we're looking at, you know, with our like when we're printing a new game, we will generally print like 1,500 of kind of a hardback. Well, we'll generally print like 2,000 of a hardback and then 1,500 of a paperback. So like that's our kind of, say, first 2 years sales expectation. And, you know, it depends, obviously. If we're doing reprints of older games, we'll print considerably fewer. If it's a game that we've, you know, that's maybe been kickstarted and we know more about the kind of sales pattern of it, then we might print more of them. But that would be our kind of average. So that's what we're looking at. Like that's a kind of a successful game for us, right? Is those numbers over 2 years. So I don't know if that gives you a kind of a sense of the, you know, again, the scale. And it's, I mean, we are, again, you know, I always say this, but it's so true. We are such a small company, and people, you know, I like to think that we punch above our weight in terms of
how many big companies other than Hasbro, like which owns Wizards of the Coast, D&D, like how many, and I guess Paizo, how many big companies are there?
I mean, I would say that there were 4, right? So there's 4 big companies. There's, like you said, like WotC was Wizards of the Coast. There's Paizo. There's Fantasy Flight, and there's Catalyst, who do Shadowrun. And those are the big 4, right? And then, like, although in saying that, I do suspect that Modiphius and Freya Legan are probably up there now as well. But again, I would say that they're a big order of magnitude below that. Like if you go into most hobby game stores, the overwhelmingly vast majority of them will stock. They will stock D&D, they will stock Pathfinder, and they will probably stock Star Wars, which is the big Fantasy Flight one, and that's it. Right, the vast majority of hobby game stores will only stock those 3 RPG titles. So if you're a smaller publisher, you know, the number of stores as a percentage of the total stores that will even stock your stuff is very, very small. So yeah, so there's, like I said, there's just a massive margin between the big players and the smaller players. Between the big players and everyone else, really.
And we've got some chat where Ichvi suggests that board games' approach to royalties may reflect Germanic cultural expectations on creative reward. I know that there's a French tangent, whereas work for hire might reflect American business creative culture. It might also just be to do with the different scales. I know that in French, there's a big legal difference between an inventor and an author, and there's no word for designer, if you know what I mean. So basically, someone who makes a game, you have to either be an inventor or an author, and these not only have cultural differences, but also legal differences.
Wow.
And so it's a very important thing to note if you're ever working with a French company. And yeah, I know that there's been a lot of talk about this, and I just want to say hello, Kurt, to Lee. I don't think everything you said in chats was appropriate, which is why I gave you a 10-second timeout. But just let's focus on RPG publishing today. And thank you everyone for kind of helping explain the situation. And we're just talking mainly about RPG publishing, and I am going to be here if you come back on Sunday, or from the 11th of from basically December, every Friday is going to be just general chat. But I would prefer to keep this a little bit more focused if you can. But thank you for engaging, and I hope that you learned something about RPG publishing, because Cat does have a lot of experience to share. And I'm going to put up the banner so you can learn a little bit about Cat if you read down there. Now, sorry about that, Cat, that wee diversion. If we could get into, yeah, you talked about so much testing and before publication, and we could talk about payment models, but because we've got only 20 minutes left of the show, I feel like that would be more of a theoretical what could be discussion. And I appreciate you acknowledging that the current system is maybe not entirely fair. Sate's mentioning, yeah, they could turn one word into 200 words. They are very good at improv. I know this to be true.
Yeah.
How much are things changed between the first iteration and what you see printed?
I mean, that really does depend on it really does depend on, and I would have to say, on the experience of the writer. And by that I mean both GM experience and writing experience, because you can see, you can tell if somebody is a very experienced GM by what they write, because they already, like I was saying earlier, have that intuitive sense of what information a GM needs to run an adventure. Whereas a less experienced GM will tend to submit something that's more like a story. And I know that sounds weird, considering I really emphasized how much of a storytelling experience an RPG is, but for a GM, you need to present information in a particular way, right? They need to know, bullet pointed lists are much more valuable to a GM than like a big page of description, right? And again, that kind of vaguely touches on what I was saying about the payment models, which is, again, you're kind of disadvantaging people who can write in a concise way effectively, which we shouldn't be. I've gone slightly off that. So in terms of the changes, yeah, so it does very, very much depend on how good the original writing was. So for some of our more experienced writers like Robin Laws, Ken Hite, Gar Hanran, like their work would be structurally largely unchanged, right? Unless they were doing something very, very new or very, very different, right? But from a structural perspective, it would be largely unchanged. Like they might maybe change the flow of information, or they might move some scenes around, or they might do something like that. But for them, it's more a tweaking and a tightening up of the final product, like a polishing it. Whereas for a newer writer, like playtesting can really expose massive structural issues. with the text, because like I said, when you hand the text over to somebody who isn't coming from your frame of reference, they're depending entirely on the text to give them everything they need to run the game. And you find out very, very quickly with external playtesting whether everything is there. Obviously, it's our job not to put something out for external playtesting if we don't feel it's ready. Like we will, we do a lot of development with
you
the
don't
writer.
want to expose the public, and you've got to have a certain degree of quality before you say,
Absolutely.
yes, this is reflecting us, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So and often that work won't be done in public. Like that will be done with us and the writers kind of behind the scenes, like I said. So there'll already have been a lot of changes for newer writers before we even get to the playtesting stage. So, I feel like we've kind of dropped the ball, or we haven't done our job very well as developers of writers. So as people who work with writers to make sure that their writing is delivering what they wanted to be delivering from an experiential perspective. So we haven't done our job properly as developers. If we release something for external playtesting and we get feedback from playtesters that it's unplayable, right? That's kind of, we would say that's less on the writer, and that's more on us, right? To have caught that. Like that shouldn't happen ever. So there shouldn't really be much of a change from the point at which it's externally play tested to what's actually in the published version. And sometimes there is, sometimes we like, I'm thinking of a book that we're working on at the moment, which is called Swords of the Serpentine, and that's a sword and sorcery kind of game inspired by like Ankh-Morpork and Fritz Lieber's Lankmar, and kind of, so it's like a medieval city kind of factions vying for power and that kind of thing. But like the key thing when we put that out, yeah, totally, Andrew. But when we put that out for playtesting, there were a couple of the rules things that didn't quite work. But a key piece of feedback that we just kept getting was that it was too difficult to find information in the book. So there was a big structural development piece that had to be done on that afterwards. So yeah, that it's those kind of changes really, like I said, that you kind of find out when you put something out for playtesting. So it can be very little changed, or it can be completely changed.
Now, we have a couple of questions for recommendations that I'm going to pose to you. Firstly, Alan earlier on chatted about, are there any solo RPGs that you can suggest? Has Pelgrane done any? Or, I mean, you're obviously not limited to just your own company stuff, but you are welcome to use that bias as you see fit.
So we haven't done solo role playing, as in we haven't done one person RPGs yet. That may be something that we do in the future. Watch this space. But what we have done is 2-person RPGs. So we've got what we call our Gumshoe 1-to-1 range, and those are for a GM and a player. So it's just one player, but you also need a GM as well. So in that range, we've got Cthulhu Confidential, which is a kind of a noir mystery kind of setting in the 1930s and 1940s. And then we've also got Night's Black Agents Solo Ops, and that are kind of modern day spies versus vampires. You play a burnt spy who has discovered that vampires exist, and they also know that you exist. And in the case of what we've published so far for Night's Black Agents Solo Ops, the protagonist character, Leila Khan, actually used to be in the thrall of the vampires. So she used to actually work for them and has kind of managed to break free of their mind control and is now trying to basically, thwart her former employers. And we're currently playtesting a solo fantasy game called and it's provisionally titled The Paragon Blade. And that's going to be, there are 3 different protagonist characters that you can play. One of them is kind of a barbarian. One of them is a sorcerer, and then one of them is a kind of a thief, rogue kind of character. Yeah, so that's our kind of other one player, one GM game. So we've got 3 of those at the moment, and we're working on doing kind of standalone settings and protagonist characters for that.
Moving on from solo stuff, which it sounds like watch this space, do you have any recommendation for a concise but yet meaty RPG? Talking about your concise writing.
I think a lot of story games and indie games have really kind of hit the balance of meat to the content kind of ratio. But from our perspective, I think that the games in #feminism, they're all designed to be 2 pages or less. So they're all what we call nano games, which are like quite short games. They're all designed to be run within an hour. But there is so much meat on those. Like, those games are in depth, they are detailed, and they are full on experiences in their own right. So those would be my go-to example of kind of concise but yet meaty RPGs. We've also just published Honey and Hot Wax, which is, like I mentioned earlier, it's an anthology of erotic art games. And again, a lot of those games are quite short, they're quite concise, but there's a lot of kind of experiential meat on those in terms of kind of the play in them. Yeah, and then another one that I just want to touch on super briefly is Fear Itself, and that's our kind of, if you want to play a classic horror film, like Fear Itself is our kind of system that you would use for that. And again, it's quite a straightforward system. It's very pared down. It's very simple, but there is a lot of kind of meat in that kind of pared downness.
I apologize to the people who've asked questions. I'm
super happy to
close this in
answer
2
questions.
minutes. So we have someone wanted to ask how they can potentially playtest stuff if they're interested in things.
Oh yeah, so we have a monthly webzine called C Page XX, and that's on our website at pelgranepress.com. And if you go onto that page, there is a subscribe button, so you can basically subscribe to our newsletter. And every month we release playtesting opportunities in that, so we let people know what's available for playtesting that month. So that's the kind of the easiest way of getting in on the list of things like that. We also have a Discord server as well. So if anyone's interested in joining that, then hit me up on Twitter. I'm at TK.
And I'm sorry, yeah, just for anyone who's new to the show, I am here every day at 10 a.m. I'm sorry I'm cutting this off. I'm going to recap this because we have covered so much. It feels like I would love to have you on again, but the truth is I'd feel guilty about it because it is so early in the morning.
I know, it's so early. If you ever move your show, Bez, I'll be on it like all the time.
Like, it was lovely, lovely, lovely talking to you, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but we talked about dragon meat, which we had some love for, and I love, and there's going to be a digital version of this year, and production and RPGs, and oh my god, potatoes. This was ridiculous. So many potatoes, so much potato chat.
Many potatoes.
We had talking about RPGs, about the fact that there's infinite possibilities, whereas in board games are literally finite. It might be massive, it might be a game of Go where there's millions, there's more than there are atoms in the universe, but there's still finite possible games of Go. And talking about allegories and empathy and immersion and how the character breaks through, and Dork Tower, and someone said Mike Kennelly and Beer for Dolphins singing Potato, which is a song that we might check out. He talks about Krautkrieg, Kartoffelkrieg. Sorry, I couldn't quite read my thing, which is a board game about potatoes. He talks about philosophy, about story arcs, about story beats, the highs, the lows, the trough, and enjoying that as you go through. About starting off with the outline, someone hopefully being easy to work with, someone being too precious about their new world, that like, oh no, I don't want to change any of this. But then you love people kind of coming up and adding new things to your world, and that suggests that hopefully they'll be a bit easier to work with. And maybe like next time, if you've already worked with them, then you might let them do their own thing, presumably. And then you have like a quick write-up, then internal playtesting, then external playtesting, but it will be one before it goes into you'll look at the write-up and you'll get paid by the word, which is problematic in its own way, and that could be another discussion for another time. And about how like 3,000 copies sold is like a fairly good success in the RPG business. And there are links in chat and on the comments in the description on YouTube. You can check out Pelgrane Press, and on Facebook I'll flash that up in a moment again. If you want to check me out, I am stuffbez.com, stuffbez.bigcartel.com, twitter.com/stuffbez, instagram.com/stuffbez, twitch.tv/stuffbez. I stream every day at 10 a.m. UK time, and it's normally with a mixture of guests. And so please tune in as close to the start as you can, because we do always start off with the silly questions before getting a bit more on topic. Stuffbybez.com/Discord. If you have enjoyed this, please go to stuffbybez.com/Discord. That will redirect you to my Discord. And then there's a cat chat to talk about cats and share any cat pictures that you want, which there's not enough people sharing pictures of cats. There's things to talk about the show if you wanted to talk about any of the topics or ask questions about cats. I don't know if you're willing to kind of answer questions after the show, because I think people have more. So if people want to go there to the BBBB chat and then ask, hey Cat, how about this? Then hopefully I can encourage Cat to answer your questions. Or if you want to ask more recommendations. It has been lovely having you. I want to say thank you, everyone. I want to say a massive, massive, massive thank you. Firstly, to Cat Tobin. It has been brilliant having you on. Thank you for waking up so early. Thank you for coming on. I want to say a massive thank you for everyone in chat. You are excellent, and thank you, Sate, for being an excellent moderator and kind of setting the tone, because some things just make me feel uncomfortable, and so I was a wee bit uncomfortable for the record at being asked to unbutton. So that made me feel personally uncomfortable, and I felt it was inappropriate, but I understand, not everyone can understand these things, so thank you for apologizing, and we're all good. Alan says, so fascinating. Thank you very much. Yes, Discord. I don't have a Twitch bot, so you can't. If you want to know the Discord, it is what I pasted just there. And just to place in the photos of Pelgrane Press, that is that. And yes, I want to say again, thank you, everyone. And now over to you. What are you up to? You can share anything you want to. So share anything you want. Within reasonable limits. Please keep it PG rated, and I would appreciate it being non-sexual. But anything that you're looking forward to doing today, maybe something that you're hoping to do, or just a boring fact about yourself, feel free to share. Kat, would you like to share anything more?
So I talked earlier about Swords of the Serpentine, and that's a thing that I'm hoping to do a bit more work on today. I'm doing a lot of the art direction for that at the moment, so I'm working with artists to get images for that, so that's quite cool. A thing that I'm really excited about, that's also in development at the moment, is what we're calling, because we don't have a better name for it right now, Gumshoe Kids. And that's an adaptation of our Gumshoe investigative mystery solving RPG system, adapted for players between 7 and 12 years old. So I'm really excited about that. I've playtested it with my nephew and niece, and they loved it. We had a fantastic time. My nephew had a character with a sentient moustache, which I just think is fantastic. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to be, I think it's probably going to be quite low key kind of thing for us, but I think it's going to be really great because a lot of our games are very kind of, they're very horror focused. So most of our games are 18 plus. We recommend them for mature players. So it'll be really nice to have something that's quite fun and playful and more kind of family focused. So those are the things that we're kind of working on at the moment. I'm also working on, like I said, some standalone Gumshoe 1-to-1 games. So these are going to be quite short, kind of PDF only, so like digital only games, but they'll feature a really broad range of very diverse protagonist characters. So I'm very, very excited about those because we can be because they're PDF only, we can be a bit more agile we can take more risks in terms of what we're putting out there from a kind of a protagonist character perspective, so we can get more niche with it and have a bit more fun with it and play more with that. So again, the Gumshoe 1-to-1 standalone protagonist characters that are going to be coming over the following months. I'm excited about those. I think there's going to be some really interesting games coming out of those.
That sounds pretty awesome. And so you go to Pelgrane Press and sign up to the mailing list to check out all of those things.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can also follow us we're at Pelgrane Press, PELGRANE, everywhere, basically on Twitter and Facebook, Instagram. We're now on Twitch, and we've got a YouTube channel as well, so you can look for us on all of those. And I'm always happy to answer any questions that people have about RPGs or the development of them or the production of them. So you can just hit me up on Twitter. I'm at THM.
Okay, we've got Maya who says, is a screenshot of Cat okay for the cat chat? Like, are you allowed to have a person named Cat in the cat chat? And I'm going to say, okay, but only like maybe once per day. Don't make a habit of it. Don't like be just spamming pictures of cats. And obviously you need to have pictures of cats, all the cats have to be willing, I mean, if it's if it's like a screenshot of like something that's being publicly broadcast, okay, share this picture for cat chat, you can do that. I want to acknowledge everyone who says someone's teaching Root for work, which is a fun game. Jess is moving to a new office, and Carter, many hugs for. I understand relationships are difficult. Chris, happy that you're enjoying the design stuff. Maya's building up cloud shifters. That sounds lots of fun. Some people are talking about late breakfast, J Guard, and possible potatoes. Oh my gosh, more potatoes. This is ridiculous. Are you seeing all this chat?
I am now. I've only just discovered how to view the chat.
Ikifi is going shopping, and
shop. I can't do a Welsh accent. Sorry, Andrew.
Shopping. I'm sorry. We have to finish, but it has been lovely, lovely, lovely having you all. For future streams, look at stuffbybez.com/streams. Feel free to share, spread the word. And tomorrow, who am I talking to tomorrow? Hold on just a second. Oh yeah, it's all about work-life balance with two people that are terrible at it. So I'm talking to Calvin Wogtaloon, and we both basically work all the time. So hopefully we'll be able to help each other on our journey of having better work-life balance. And there's only one thing left to do. I need to say bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, bye, bye. Bye. And now it's time to go. Bye bye, everyone.